Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode. I have a new author to introduce you to today. Sarah Armstrong is joining me. She is an executive with Google, but has written a book that is going to be most helpful for us to talk about, The Mom's Guide to a Good Divorce. So, Sarah, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Shauna. Great to be here.
Absolutely. I love that we were already so much on the same page when we were just chatting before we hit record. Um, I love that the universe brings me people that I'm so aligned with and that I can have such fun conversations with.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, so I love to get these conversations started with just a quick little intro, like who are we talking to? Tell us a little bit about yourself. The way I love to frame up that question, though, is how have you embraced this idea of starting again?
Great question. I think to starting again for me and my journey was my daughter was 7 years old when I went through a divorce. And I was actually someone who never envisioned this, you never envision it happening to you.
Exactly.
And I should start by saying my parents have been married for 55 years, an amazing
Impressive.
picture of partnership. And that
Yes.
was obviously the goal. And sometimes though things don't happen as planned. And so
Yes.
when I went through my divorce at, I think it was age 38, which was 14 years ago now, it was a starting over moment. And I
For
needed to
sure.
think about what I wanted life to look like for me, for Grace, just overall. And so it was a reset moment. It was a reflective moment. But with that, I think what I did is I set a vision for what I wanted life for the two of us to look like, and then what I wanted my life to look like long term. And I'm happy to report back that, 14 years later, I think both of those things, both how Grace and I lived our life as a new family structure and in very much co-parenting with my ex-husband to raise Grace, and then my own life from a career standpoint and friendships and family and the life I built. Beyond that, I'm so happy right now in my life, and I think it's partly because of the approach and the intent of how I went into the process of getting divorced,
Yeah.
and then kind of the steps I took throughout the divorce, and then the years following how I decided to live my life. And so it's interesting, Shauna. I've had one person recently that said I've made divorce look too good.
I've been accused of the same thing.
Yes, and I said, wow. I said I'm just trying to be happy.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
trying to be happy. So I think that's it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah. It is. It is. And I think, at least for my sake, my journey has not ended up where I intended for it to go at all. And yet, so much of what you said had intention at the core of it. And this is always what I say, intention is everything. How we do one thing is how we do everything. But I think setting the intention to be happy and let your life be the way you want it to be on purpose is so powerful. So I love that your story is really kind of resonating with that as well. So tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. And actually, I like to start by saying, just for the record, I'm not an advocate for divorce.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, couples that get married stay happily married for the long term. I truly hope that that's the case.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, these days that's not always the case, and it's more common than ever. And I like to reflect on the fact that no one gets married to get divorced, right?
Very true.
And no one gets divorced generally for positive reasons. There's usually a trigger or something that has caused that decision to go down
It's
that path.
generally not good.
It's not good. Yes. Usually there's
Yes.
something that, I don't think this is what I want in my life. But I think the thing that's most important and why I wrote this book is children do not get to make the decision that their parents are going to go through this process, but
Yep.
their lives, Shauna, are the most significantly impacted by this decision.
100%.
And so with my journey on this, we came to the realization that we were going to go through a divorce. Grace was 7 years old. And I had, in fairness, as happily married as my parents were, I had watched some very ugly divorces growing up of my of family friends,
Sure.
friends of my parents. And so I had a mental model of what divorce looked like. And I thought to myself, I don't want to do it that way. And I don't want that for Grace.
Right.
And I don't want her to live through what I saw my friends live through as children that were my close friends and was growing up. So I said to my ex-husband as we went down this path, I don't know what this looks like, but I'd really like to think about how we approach this. And so over the course of time, as we went through our divorce process, there was a lot of, to your point earlier, there was a lot of intent, a lot of trying to think about what, you know, how we were going to approach things. And so we did go through it in a very specific way. And what's interesting is that after we'd done it over the course of 5 years, I had other friends, because I was the first in my friend group to go through divorce. Grace
Mm-hmm.
was also the first. She was first grade. She was the first of her friends to have parents going through divorce.
Yep.
So over the course of about 5 years, I had different friends that would come to me and say, would you help me think through this? I've come to the realization I need to go down this path, and I've
Yeah.
watched you, and I'd like to model what you've done, and you've done it so well. And so I say in a strange way, I became the poster child for a good divorce,
Yeah.
and so I would sit down with them over glasses of wine in my living room, and we'd talk through things. And at the end of each of their respective journeys, these are four of my very close friends, they'd say, you really need to write this stuff down.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, I'm in the corporate world. I'm very good at bullet points, but I don't fashion myself a writer. That was never on the bucket list of life to write a book. And so I said to my friends, "Oh yeah, maybe someday." But I didn't think I'd do it.
Yeah.
But I was at a business dinner in Mexico City with a group of colleagues, and a good friend and colleague turned to me and he said, "Sarah, you're so happy." And I said, "Oh, I'm really happy." And he said, "But you're divorced."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Selma, getting divorced is not a death sentence."
No.
I said, "Yeah, I'm happy. Grace is happy. My ex-husband's happy." I'm like, "We're all happy." And yes, we've gone through a divorce. And I mentioned to him that a number of my friends had been encouraging me to write a book. And so he said, you should really do that. And so I got on the plane the next morning, and I was on Delta, and I opened my personal laptop and I wrote one line that said, "This book is written by a girl who never ever thought she would get a divorce, who got a divorce, and what she learned along the way."
Oh,
And then
an
I wrote,
amazing, amazing opening.
yeah, that was the thought. That was just the thought
Yeah.
that came to me. And it literally is the first page of my book, just that
I
statement by
love it.
itself. And then I wrote about 90% of it I traveled internationally for my job. So I would, instead of, I joke that as everyone else was watching movies or reading books, I was after I'd finished my work on my flight, I would open my personal laptop and, type away. So over the course of about a year, I wrote a large portion of the book. And then I got really busy at work and I didn't touch this file for about 9 months.
Yeah.
And I was on a flight to California and I opened the file and I literally talked to my laptop. I said, "Are you going to be a file on my laptop or am I going to do something with
Yep.
you?" And I thought, you know what? There's so much here that I want to share with the world because I don't think there's enough discussion in society about the concept of a good divorce. So I gave myself a goal of getting it published. I decided to self-publish. So I did that. Now, what's interesting, Shauna, is the term good divorce
Mm-hmm.
came from Grace, my daughter.
Oh,
And so,
out of the mouth of babes, I tell you.
yeah, I tell you. And she was 8. It was a year after our divorce. And we're standing in a CVS at the checkout counter. And there's a celebrity couple on the front of People magazine. And they're getting a divorce. And she says to me, "Mommy, is that a good divorce or a bad divorce?"
Mm.
And I said, "Grace, I don't know. What's the difference between a good divorce and a bad divorce?"
Oh, yeah.
She goes, "Well, good divorce is when the mommy and daddy are nice to each other like you and daddy. And a bad divorce is when they scream at each other."
Yeah.
And I looked at her and I said, "It's hard to tell from a magazine cover what's going on there."
It is.
But Sean, as I walked out of the CVS that day, I thought, you know what, whatever my ex-husband and I were doing in terms of co-parenting Grace, that she could, a year after we have literally changed her life in so many ways, that she could say we had a good divorce. I knew that we were onto something and that we needed to continue on that path.
Yeah. Well, and I often ask people, what does good look like? And again, it's about intention, but I think we have to set out and know what we're striving for. What does good look like? And exactly like you're saying, this idea of a good divorce, we don't have really examples of that.
Right. It's so true. And that's, and people say, well, it's interesting when I titled my book this, I've had a lot of raised eyebrows when I mentioned the title or what I've written about.
Yeah.
And, And I start by saying, how do I define a good divorce? A good divorce is when couples put aside their feelings for one another and focus on what's best for their children.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yes.
full stop. Like that's the essence of it.
Yep.
But then, Sean, as you think about it, when a couple goes through divorce and children involved, the stakes are high.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they are.
We owe it to our children that they're not collateral damage
Yep.
due to this divorce. And, even though I say, couples have decided they don't want to be married to one another, they don't want to live in the same house as one another. We made a commitment to our children when we bring them into the world.
Yep.
To raise them in the healthiest, happiest, safest environment possible. Yep. I say that we cover the plugs, right? We put bike helmets on them. We feed them organic milk, whatever you're doing on
whatever your thing is. Yes.
I'm being a good parent, moment. And, the toxicity that can come with a divorce.
Yes.
Right? Can have such long-term impact on a children's view on relationships, their view on marriage and their overall happiness in life. And, I think if we're not intentional, if we don't take co-parenting with that other spouse seriously, with the intent of having a good divorce, then what we're ultimately doing is potentially leaving our children in that toxic environment, not just for the months of the divorce, but for potentially years.
Well, it gives them the example to build their life on. So this is what I had to realize. I've written a similar book. Mine was a little different focus, but it was all on how to rebuild your life after divorce so that the mom can be the happiest version of herself, because she is doing this very important work to raise children. And so a lot of the reasons people leave marriages is because they're setting an example they don't want their children to replicate. Mm-hmm. But I think the divorce years and what comes after that is equally important. And a lot of people are not focused on that, and they get caught in the emotional whirlwind of everything that is included with getting a divorce that sometimes they can't see past that.
Absolutely. And I think what you said is really important, because when you get caught in that emotional cycle of negativity that can come, and I generally say that when you go through divorce, you're going to have buttons that can be pushed that will take you right back to that spot, or right back to that moment, or
a decade later,
or remind, exactly, or remind you why you're not married to that person. So those all exist.
Yes.
I think the most important point for all of us to think about, and by the way, this is for both either side of the equation, both sure. parents, but I'll speak to the mom side for this part, is I think we need to build a compartmentalization muscle if we don't have one. And what I mean by that, and I talk about that in my book, is that those buttons will be pushed, no question. But when those buttons are pushed, what do you do about it? How do you react? And I joke that I do Pilates. You want to have like a strong core muscle, but this compartmentalization muscle takes, you need to strengthen it and practice it and build it. And what it means is, if your button's pushed in that moment and your children are in earshot or in view of the situation, do you react and let that button be pushed and show the reaction that the button that's been pushed would generally cause? Or do you take a moment, take a deep breath and say, you know what, now is not the time for me to react to that. I'm going to let it roll off my back. I'm going to take the high road. There's lots of ways to think about it. But I'm not going to let this moment be a moment that is a reminder to our children that we're in this divorce situation, that, it's all of those conscious thoughts that you have to have. And it's, by the way, I'm not saying to suppress emotions and never express them, because that's not healthy either.
Oh, yeah. That just blows up in your face in another way.
Exactly. That's going to come out in many other ways.
Yes.
But what I would say is, go talk to your therapist, go talk to a family member, go talk to a friend, go take a long walk.
Choose your moment.
Exactly. And then express emotion, express the frustration, say why that moment was so, frustrating to you or set you off, but not when your children are there, because those moments, they're watching everything.
Yeah.
They're watching every moment.
So I know your daughter is older now. I've had 3 divorces. My 2 older girls, 30 and 28 now. So we've done all the years of parenting, except for all the adult years that are to come. Yes. But there were so many moments when they were watching my response to things that only now for them are kind of coming to the surface, where our children learn more by observing than they ever do based on what we tell them. And so they've been able to kind of witness my resilience or my strength or my self-control or whatever
Mhm.
lack thereof I had as well. So just to be clear, I'm not a perfect person.
No, none of us, by the way.
So
No, no,
so
there's
they
not
got
perfection. Yes.
lots of examples of how not to do things as well as how to do things. And I think that that is so powerful for our kids to be able to see things done well and us not react in the moment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is, to your point, there's going to be times when we do it well. There's going to be times when we don't, and in those moments, though, the important thing is to acknowledge, you know what, I didn't handle that well, and to say to your children,
Yes.
Mom didn't really handle that well, and next time I'm going to either do better or I'm not going to. So almost acknowledge it and own it, and
Yes.
then move on. But I think the thing is for your children to know you recognize, and I have a saying I've said to Grace over the years, like, Mom's doing the best I can,
Yes.
right? Some
Mm-hmm.
days I do things well and some days not so much, but I'm doing the best I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
And it's one of my kind of mantras of, we're all doing the best we can. We're all works
It's
in
true.
progress in life.
It's true.
We're not going to be perfect. But we try, but we're trying. We're trying to do the right thing for them in those moments.
For sure. Yeah. And I think for me, when I've struggled, when I can come back to what is best for my kids has been the best way for me to frame any decision or any response. In in my kids' best interest, how should I respond to this situation? And that has been the best kind of guiding light for me
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a moment early on in our divorce process where it still sticks with me to this day. We were meeting with a child specialist prior to telling Grace we were going to go through divorce to help us think about how to tell her and,
Hmm.
just the whole process. So we sat down with him and he looks at me and he says, "Do you travel?" And I said, "Yeah, I travel professionally, or I travel internationally for my job." And he looks at my ex-husband and says, "Do you travel?" And he says, "Yeah, I travel domestically." He said, "Well, Grace is about to become a professional traveler. She's
Hmm.
going to travel every week for the next 11 years until she goes off to college."
Yep.
And I honestly, Sean, I burst into tears.
Yep.
And he said, because she's going to have to pack a bag every week.
Every week.
And I just burst into tears and I said, "That's not what I want for her. This is not what I want for her. This is not what I want for
Hmm.
her life." And so we walked out of that session and I said to my ex-husband, I said, "I don't know what this looks like. I literally don't know, but I want to figure out how to minimize Grace feeling like she's a professional traveler."
Yep.
And so now some of the things, Sean, I'll share are they have socioeconomic considerations and logistics considerations, I realize. But, what we try to do is just have all the basics at both homes,
Yep.
just like the socks and the underwear and, the basics so that when
Listen, that
Grace,
is such an important topic. I don't even know that I've ever talked about this, but I know that it's been a topic amongst my friends a lot. Just the basics
just the
is
basics.
so important that
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of parents get, and I know I'm cutting you off, but I think this is
No, no, no,
important for us
no.
to talk about.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
so many parents get caught up in who paid for what and I said, I don't care if you have to pay for both sets of deodorant and shampoo. Your kid needs both at both places. And they don't
Absolutely.
need to pack up basic necessities every few days or every week.
Absolutely. And I feel so agreed. I feel so strong about it. Also because they don't need to be. So Grace was in first grade. She didn't need to be the one kid in the carpool line with an extra bag going, "Where are you?
Oh,
Why do
yes,
you have that, Grace? Like, what are you doing?"
yes,
Like, "Well, I'm going to my dad's house. I'm going to my mom's house." Like, why have to carry that extra baggage every week? So, and
literally
also,
extra
I mean,
baggage. Yeah,
literally extra
yeah.
baggage. Now, the interesting thing when you say the basics, I do have, funny reflection that somehow all the socks get at one house. I don't know how it happens.
Oh,
They would
yes.
migrate, they
Everything
migrate.
migrates from one to the, and I'm like,
It's-
why are all your t-shirts over there?
yeah,
And then we have none here. Like, you're
yeah,
coming back in a t-shirt. What is happening?
exactly. I don't know what else happens, but all the socks. So I would have,
It does.
this is what's interesting is I would have what we would call rebalancing days. Where I would text my ex-husband, I say, "Hey, things
Ooh,
are
I
out of
love
balance."
that title.
Yeah. And so
That's
they
so
would,
good.
yeah. So we would then, well, but then, by the way, this is the key. It wasn't about Grace going into her drawers and into her closet to figure out what was not
Yes.
where it should be. It was for us to do. She was 7 and 8 and 9 years old.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so I said, go look. I don't have socks. I don't know this, that. So he would go find the things, put it in a bag. And when we transitioned, he handed the bag to me.
Mm-hmm.
I took the bag and then I put it away in Grace's dresser. Because again, why should she have to unpack and repack her
Yeah.
life and her like every week or every
Yeah.
couple of weeks? This wasn't her doing. She didn't choose this life.
It's important that I think I think helpful is the word I'm looking for. It's helpful that you both traveled. So you had that concept of the pains that come along with traveling, right? Just the inconveniences of not being home in your own bed. And to put it in that perspective, because I think a lot of people, generally speaking, divorced or not, don't consider what that's like for a kid to literally live in two homes.
Yeah.
Like they have two bedrooms.
Yeah.
There's no sense of like, this is my space. They're trying to cultivate their space in two different places. And that alone is such a difficult thing to manage for a human, much less a
Sure.
small child.
No, I agree. And it's interesting because Grace never once complained, Sean, in all those years, 11 years of going back, but she never once complained about going back and forth. But what I can tell you is, as she was heading off to college, I'll never forget, she came home one night. She was at her dad. She came home. She goes, Mom, I'm calling this. And she was, by the way, she's getting ready to pack and figure out what she was taking to school. She said, I'm calling this the Great Consolidation.
Oh, wow.
And I go, so tell me more. And she said, when I head off to college, it'll be the first time in 11 years where all my stuff is in one place.
That is so amazing that she recognized that. But talk about turning a big bittersweet moment into this really positive thing.
Yeah, and that's what, and I said to her, I go, Grace, I said, first of all, I'm so happy that you're going to have all your stuff in one place. You so deserve that. And it hit me though. I said, but you've never once complained to Mom and Dad about the fact that you didn't have all of your stuff in one place. And I thank you for that, but I'm really happy that moving forward, you get that,
Aww.
And so it was a moment. It was a moment.
For sure. The great consolidation.
The great consolidation. And then the only other thing I'd say on this topic is there are going to be those special items that you're not going to be able to have in both homes. Yep. And when those things aren't in the place they're meant to be, because it's going to happen. Grace said one day she came down the stairs, she goes, Mom, it's dress up day at school. My dress shoes are at Dad's. Now, my ex-husband lived 10 minutes away. So we were literally just like, I had timed it just perfectly to get out the door, to get to carpool, to get to work, and I took a deep breath. I said, well, let's go to Dad's house, And so
I'm going to be late today.
We're going to be late today. But you know what? Instead of saying, well, Grace, why didn't you remember it was dress up day? You should have had your dress up shoes here. It's like, it's not her fault.
Yeah.
That her one pair of dress up shoes is at her dad's house because that's the last time she wore them.
Oh, man. So I cannot tell you how many times one of us has had to deliver the lovey, whatever, for whatever child. Like it just, there you go. Here it is.
Yes.
Like
Totally. Yes. So all of those, but those are moments. Those are the moments where I go, it goes back to that bit of that compartmentalization muscle. It goes back to just taking some deep breaths in the moment.
Oh, yeah. Or lots of them. Yes.
Lots of them. Right. And saying, okay, not their fault. Yeah. They didn't create the situation. You created the situation. Yeah. How do you help them through it so that they don't feel the constant reminder that their life isn't like every other kid's? Yeah. And that they're a child of divorce.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, okay. So let's talk a little bit about this journey of yours to become an author, which you didn't set out to be. What do you think surprised you most about that journey to author?
Oh gosh, so many surprises. First of all, I'm a very private person. And so the fact that I've actually written a book on divorce, on my divorce, is a bit of its own surprise. I think the other thing for me is just, and by the way, I do this to give back. This is I joke that I didn't do this to make money. This is about giving back to women and families that are going through this really challenging time in life. So I think for me, whether it's a surprise or not, it's just the fulfillment I get from helping people through this moment is beyond anything I could have imagined. And I literally, right after I'd launched the book, it's been out since 2016, but right after I launched the book, I had a woman stop me in the grocery store in the produce section. And she said to me, "Are you Sarah Armstrong, the author?" I had to kind of stop, and I said, I actually am, yes. And she said, well, I was at your book launch at Barnes & Noble, and I'm going through divorce. And I always say, Shauna, it's always and she says, and I'm reading your book, and it's always bittersweet because I'm always sorry to hear
Yep.
someone's going through divorce, but
Oh my gosh,
good
yes.
to hear that you have my book. But she said, I want to thank you for writing this book because I carry it with me everywhere and it keeps me calm.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I said to her, and so she goes, thank you. And then and I go, well, thank you for sharing that with me. She walked away, Sean. I stood in the middle of the produce section with my cart and I watched her walk away. And I thought, that is why I've written this book, to help someone I've never met before,
Yep.
who's going through one of the most challenging times in their
Oh, it's
life.
so hard. Yes.
Right. But I'm helping to keep that book is helping to keep her calm. And I said, for me, that's the best gift that could be given to me. And I'm honestly, that one person is worth, all the effort of
Oh,
having written
yes.
the book and knowing
That's
that
amazing.
helps one person. So I guess for me, the journey and I guess the surprise and the fulfillment is what has been so amazing. And I
Yeah.
just, I know that I still, I mean, again, I call it my book journey.
Right.
And there are surprises and moments every day that come out from people sharing. I mean, I literally almost on a daily basis. Sadly, someone says to me, "I've given your book to someone, someone in my
Yep.
circle of life," and
Yep.
I just always I'm like, well, hopefully it helps. And I had a young gal actually recently wanted to network with me within the company I work for, and before we started, she said, "I want you to know I'm reading your book." And I said, "Oh," and again, sorry to hear going through that. She goes, "Well, I sent it to my friend's house and I sit in her car and I read it because I can't have it on the Amazon account."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It-
This is not at all what we're talking about today, but
mm,
I had a moment when I was reading a book on domestic abuse because I was in an abusive relationship. And I sat in the library to read this book on my lunch break because I couldn't have anybody know what I was reading.
mm, yeah,
Books change
change.
lives.
They do. They do.
Yes.
And
Well,
that's
and
why, yeah,
I
yeah,
think
and
it's always amazing, this journey to becoming an author. It's usually the really private, quiet people who have the most impactful story to tell. And they're like, yeah, no, I'm not going to write that book. That's how I
yeah,
felt when I heard the nudge to write after
yeah,
a third divorce. I was like,
yeah,
are you fucking kidding me?
yeah,
I am not going to be the poster child for
yeah,
how to get a divorce.
yeah,
And I had a lot of moments where I would start conversations with, I'm not advocating for divorce.
that's why I start with that.
I
Absolutely.
don't want you to think that I'm pro divorce. I'm
Right.
actually anti divorce. I
Mhm,
really would love to see,
mhm.
I'm hopeless romantic. I love
Yes.
weddings more than
Yeah.
anything else on the planet. I'm like, I want long, happy
Mhm,
marriages.
mhm.
I just know that that's not always how it works out. And the people who end
Absolutely.
up divorced are struggling and they need help. And
Mhm.
it can be done so much better. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you wrote your book
Well,
because it is
thank
valuable.
you.
Yes.
Thank you
Yes.
so much. No, it's been so rewarding, and I just think it's out there and it's meant to help, for those
Yep.
that are needing it with a
Yep.
I will say, Sean, with a very specific intent because I was given, to your point, I was given a lot of books during my divorce that were very thick and dense and
Oh my gosh. Yes.
they
So
right and
overwhelming in a
overwhelming. And
moment of total overwhelm
yeah,
already.
and so I opened them. I never read them. No, I didn't read a book.
Yeah.
And so when I wrote this book, in terms of how I designed the book itself, it was very intentional. So I broke it into phases. So preparing for the change, during the change, and post the change.
Yep.
And then each topic that I cover is only a paragraph to a page long. And the reason I do that is, as you know, as a mom and a working mom in this instance, like what you can take in and process and think about. I mean, you need it in the bite-sized pieces, as I call it, because if
Yes.
not, it's you're overwhelmed.
Yes.
And
It's
so
too
I
much.
also
Too
say
much.
it's too much. Exactly. And I also say the book's not meant to be read cover to cover, right?
Yeah.
Because wherever you are, read a couple pages, take a couple topics in. It's meant to be about the decisions you have to make about your children, the discussions you need to have about those decisions, and being
Yep.
really conscious about these specific topics and how you're raising your children, co-parenting with your ex-spouse,
Yep.
and also, by the way, how you're taking care of yourself, how you're
Ah,
thinking about
the
life
the forgotten
post-divorce.
part. Yes.
Right, right. What's your self like? What's the self-care that you're doing for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And just recognizing that there's so much to think about and you can't take it all in all at once. And so how do you go through this process? You take those pieces in, process them, do the best you can with that one topic,
Yes.
and then
Yes.
go into the next one.
Moms are just doing the best they can.
That's right. That's right.
I love it. I love it. Well, okay. So when you look back to like the younger you before she ventured into any one of these experiences in life,
Yeah.
what advice would you give her?
Oh gosh, I think my advice to my younger you was you can have a plan, right? Or have a thought of what your life will look like, and it will probably not turn out that way. But then, however it's going meant to turn out, embrace that change because what comes of that change can be way more powerful, impactful than the plan that you might have had.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really beautiful. It's true. I've had all sorts of plans, and plans are great. Like I made a career on helping people work through plans as a project manager. Like plans are
Yes,
important,
yes, they are.
but also rarely goes according to plans. So
That's right.
let's
That's
roll
right.
with the punches.
Yes, exactly. I think the agility and the flexibility in your mindset over the course of time and embracing what may be, quite honestly, I mean, again, a divorce is generally seen in society as a negative thing, right? You've gotten divorced.
Oh yes,
And I would say that's the other thing with this
it's
journey.
looked at like it's a failure. You have
Well,
failed.
it's a scarlet letter, Shauna.
Hmm.
It's a scarlet letter that society would like to give those of us that have gone through divorce and say,
Yep.
now you need to hold this as a label. You need to carry this as a
Oh
scarlet letter.
yes.
And I don't believe that. Just so you know, I don't believe it's an action. You get
Yeah.
divorced.
Yeah.
It does not need to be a negative cloud
Nope.
that follows you or your children
Nope.
throughout your life.
No.
I don't believe it. But I think that there's reminders in society on a daily basis. And I do say this, recently I went to the dentist and I had to fill out a form and they asked for status and divorce was on there. I'm like, why does it matter? You're cleaning
I
my
would
teeth.
also like to know why they ask this question. Why?
Yeah,
Why does it
why?
matter?
It doesn't matter. You're cleaning my teeth. I hope my teeth are white, but why does it matter whether I'm divorced, single,
Yeah.
married, widowed? Like, and
Yep.
again, widowed is on there too. And I'm like, why does it? So I just think there's but those are moments. Those are meant to be the reminders of, oh, by the way, you need to label yourself as divorced.
Yeah.
And so I just think that, at least from my standpoint, I think there's a way to approach this life change that we've gone through
Yep.
with a mindset that can allow you to live the happiest, most fulfilled, rewarding life
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
And I would like to help. And that's why, quite honestly, I think as much as writing my book and, quote unquote, selling books, I think for me, what drives me now is getting the concept of a good divorce out into society so that people
Yes.
can think about things in a different way and actually have that concept out there and say, huh, that's interesting. Let me
Yeah.
look into that. Let me understand what it would take to do that. And, so
Yeah. And I think
that's what
those examples and talking through it and simply just talking about it is really important. But this whole like, what does good look like is so important. I just had a guest recently who her whole business is focused on helping step families, and
interesting.
which is a whole thing, let me tell you.
Yes, interesting.
And so she and I did a whole lot of talking about this same concept that we don't really talk about what good looks like. And we're all working under these myths. And when
Yes.
we're talking about divorce, there's a lot of myths that it has to be ugly and toxic and horrible for everybody
Yeah.
involved. And
It
that's
doesn't
not the
have to
case at
be.
all.
Well, it's interesting, Shauna, because I had someone, if when I talk about my divorce, I say I had a good divorce. Generally, when I'm talking to someone, they'll say, I know one other couple that's
Yes.
done it that way. And I say, my response to that is, wouldn't it be great that most couples that went through divorce could have a good, like, why is
Yeah.
it that, one? Like, why is it just the one?
Yep.
And I think that's where, because to your point, most people go in with the mindset of, we're going to battle it out. It's going to be negative and it's going to be negative for forever. And
Yeah. Yeah.
there's almost a systematic approach to that through all of the various processes you go through. And that's what I'd love to help change but it takes one divorce at a time for people to see a different model.
Yes, it does.
And,
And I think it takes one person to initiate that. So I think that's another thing people have a misconception about, is that both people have to come to the table initially wanting the same thing. And I'm like, no, not necessarily. One person can lead this effort.
absolutely. And that's an important point because I do have, by the way, I should say there are instances, and I appreciate there are instances where you can't interact with the other person. You will never talk to them,
Oh,
see
sure.
them, again. And I appreciate that. So I'm not talking about those specific things. But for most instances, you as an individual can only control what you can control. Right?
Yes.
But you can control how you react to things, what you say or don't say,
And that
and
is
all of
such a huge influence on the overall situation, just what you can control.
absolutely. And then with that, to your point, if you do that for yourself and for your children, at least one side of the equation is showing positive intent of how you want this to unfold. If the
Yeah.
other side is not a willing participant, then your children will eventually see the differences and understand the
Yeah.
differences and let
Yeah.
them make their own conclusions. You don't need to point that out, by the way. It's not, you
Nope.
don't need to narrate. I always say we don't need to narrate for our children. Our children they can fully narrate for themselves and
It is
they're
true.
observing it all,
It is true. And they will.
right? They will. They will.
Mhm.
And they'll have reflections over the course of time that are going to surprise you because they will have
Oh, yes.
connected more dots than you think.
Then you
So,
realize, yes.
so that's why I think it's not for us to narrate for them. And I think just focusing on what you can influence and what you have within your control to stay on the positive and side of the intent of
Yes.
this process, of your actions, of your reactions, of those decisions, all of those then stack up into leading you down a path where you have a better chance than not
Absolutely.
of
Absolutely.
ending up with a good divorce.
And honestly, even the most toxic person, like if all they're met with is kindness and non-reactions and neutral, like it takes the wind out of their sails. So it is such an influential direction for the whole situation. And I always call it a working relationship. Like you're not married anymore, but you have a working relationship for the length of time that you are still raising children. So your control is, I always say you got to stay in your own lane, right? You can only
Yes.
control what's in your lane and your car. Like
Yes.
he's doing his, you do yours.
Yep.
Um, but the amount of influence that is there is, I think, what most people lose sight of. And
Yes.
it's quite a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, so when you look forward to what you do next and what comes next in your life, what do you now believe is possible?
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, I actually think I have a strong belief anything's possible if you set your mind to it.
Yeah.
And I also kind of put a mantra out for myself that life is meant to be an exceptional journey.
Ooh, I like that.
Um, and
That's a good
so
one.
that's, yeah. And so
Exceptional
that's,
journey.
yeah. And so that's what I've kind of tried to live in my life. And I think as I look ahead, and I'm so excited about the years ahead, there's more, there's more in terms of hopefully helping society, both with this book. And as I mentioned to you before, I'm in the process of publishing my second book called The Art of the Juggling Act, which is a bite-sized guide for working parents.
So good.
And yes, and I think, I look at what's happened in society over the years and all the pressures of being a working parent and what we're
Yes.
meant to be doing as parents and meant to be doing in the workplace and all those things. So it's actually structured in a similar way to my divorce book in terms of bite-sized pieces of guidance. But
So
I
smart.
think,
Yes.
yeah, so for me, I think as I look ahead, both from a professional and personal standpoint, I'm just excited about this next phase of life. I am an empty nester. Grace is now 21. She's a junior in college, so she's often her wings are flying, as I like to
Yes.
say. And I am proud of who she is as a person and what she's doing in life. And so now I'm embracing this kind of next phase of life and looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
Well, so fun. Well, okay. So my last question for you is, how can people find you so they know when this next book comes out?
Oh, great, great. So my website is probably the best way to connect with me. It's www.gooddivorce.guide. And my email's on there and details about the book is on there. The book itself, by the way, is available in paperback, ebook, iBook, Kindle, as well as I went into the studio and did an Audible version. So,
Oh,
and to your
good,
point
good,
earlier
good.
about not wanting people to see or understand what you might be wanting to take in,
Yeah.
I feel like that gives the flexibility that if you want to go out on a walk and just listen to a couple of bite-sized pieces and then reflect on them, you can do
Yes.
that.
The
You know,
audiobooks are a great way to privately consume the
it is
information.
absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. It can
I did
be
the
on
same
there.
thing. I recorded the audiobook and I was so done reading my own words by this point. I did not want to record an audiobook. And yet there was a moment where I was recording with, I was doing it remotely because this was during COVID. Um, And the producer, I broke down in total tears. And I was like, I don't even know where this came from, but it was just like touching on those moments that I
Yeah.
talk about in this book. And
Yeah.
oh, that's some of that stuff's still raw.
It's still there. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I think it's both cathartic and therapeutic, but it is also a very hard thing to sit and read your
it
own
is.
words and have it all
It is
come out. But I do think there's something about an audiobook for those that are going through these types of phases in
very
life. Private.
private matters. Yes,
Yes,
it is really
absolutely.
helpful. And that's ultimately why I did it as well. But very
Absolutely.
good. Okay, so I will be sure to include all of those links in the show
Great.
notes so everyone can pop over there and find you and be the first to know when your new book comes out. Maybe you'll come back and talk to us then.
I would love to. I would love to. Thank you for
Amazing.
the invitation.
Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I know that it will be most helpful for the listeners. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sean. I really enjoyed it as well.